Welcome back to the Mayhem Performance Podcast. Last week, we did a toolkit video all about accessory work and the framework that we use when we write accessory work. And that same framework is used in all of the training that we do. The way that looks is we start with, how does someone move? Do they have the range of motion that's needed for the movement that they are testing? Number two then is, once they have the range of motion, do they have the stability in those end ranges? Once we have stability in those end ranges, now they can actually express force. Then we can move on to the actual movements themselves, and that is mastery of a movement. That's once we get those things, we want to now identify any limitations in movement economy and fix those so the athlete can be more powerful, strong, and enduring for the sport of CrossFit. And so what we wanted to do in the podcast today is kind of do a deep dive into mastery of movements. How do we actually work on someone's back squat, overhead squat, snatch, handstand, push-up, ring muscle, whatever it may be. And as coaches, how do we think about the framework for writing high-quality programs that get them stronger, more enduring, and moving better at the same time?
Dom, answer it. All of it.
No.
I think the place that I would start just kind of asking you guys is, like, let's do an example. So, like, we have someone that comes in, they want to get stronger at the back squat. Let's just use a typical lift. Everyone's doing that in the sport of CrossFit. We do an assessment. They actually move really well. They have good positions. They have decent stability in those end ranges. And now we go to the back squat, but they're not very strong. And they come to you, Dom, Jake, I really want to drive up my 1RM back squat. And then from there, I want to be able to get enduring so that I can have good squat endurance for the sport. Kind of, where do you guys start with thinking about how do I progress an athlete? Where do I start them to drive their 1RMs up? And then how do I get them enduring after that?
Let me give you an example, just because, again, my crappy squat. So my all-time, Dom, I come to you. My all-time squat was 385 back squat. My deadlift was 520, right? Power was pretty good. I could power clean 320. I could snatch 260. Yeah. So it's clearly my squat that's holding me back. Yeah. So, kind of just like to provide an example of that. Where would you begin?
I mean, so I think we look at, from testing, I would look at those things, obviously, and see a discrepancy. And the goal would be to get your back squat to a higher percentage of your deadlift. And then that would also structure out the whole skeleton of whatever training phase we're doing. So if we're doing an 8-week block, the priority is going to be squat, not hinge, right? Across a week. So we're going to do multiple days of squatting versus like multiple days of hinging. We may not even do hinging for a period of time, depending on where we're at in the season. And then I think for you specifically, after I look at how you move, if you're moving really well, I think something I would add to that is I would do like unilateral testing. So I would check like right leg, rear foot elevated split squat, left leg, rear foot elevated split squat. I would also check lunging. And I think I would even go into like this is what I do, is I look at the way people squat. Do they high bar squat? Do they low bar squat? Are you a posterior dominant squatter where you drive your hips way back? Yeah. Or are you a little more vertically loaded? And then I base everything off that. For you with such a high deadlift, I'd probably like prioritize more front squatting in your training for that. But I've seen a huge benefit just in general for people who struggle with squatting, like especially CrossFitters that come into coaching, is like they just don't really have any unilateral work. And the minute they start doing single leg stuff, their squat like explodes.
Yeah. I think a good point that you just made is like, hey, I may bias the front squat. And the reason for that, so that people that are listening to this is, and we talked about this in the toolkit video, is you first got to think about like functional anatomy. Like, what is the weak point in the pattern? If they're a really good puller off the ground, most likely they have pretty strong erectors, probably strong glutes, but they may be weaker on the anterior side of the chain. So for someone like Jake, maybe he does kind of push his hips back when he squats, and I assume that you do. Actually, I know you and I are the same in that way. Like, we push our hips back a little bit more. We're more glute dominant.
How can I good morning my squat
as fast
as possible?
I think Louis Simmons talked about that, right? But the point being is, I want to identify, okay, he's really strong with his glutes, maybe more of his back, so he can get into that like kind of deep, almost like hip squat, but we need to drive up his quads or get his quads stronger. So that's a part in the pattern that if we isolate that, and single leg work can work really well for that, especially if there are asymmetries, or doing more front squat style work that's going to keep him more vertical so that he can get his knees a little bit farther forward and use more quads. Now you're working on the weak part of that pattern.
When you say single leg, quick note on that, Dom, too, because we talked about in the toolkit video intensity. And so talk to me about actual specific exercise selection. So use me, hip shooting back, pull stronger than his squat, the quads are weak. relatively speaking. Where would you begin with prescribing single leg? Actually, let's say I don't have an asymmetry. Like I'm balanced. I'm just weak.
You can do like I had you test a front rack rear foot elevated split squat, like a 5 RM on each leg or something. It was fine. It was like 155 per leg. I think I would probably, I've done this for someone actually, is I have a day where we don't squat, and that is our main squatting thing. And we actually like load that like strength training. Yeah. So like we're doing like 8 per leg, front rack, rear foot elevated split squat, 60 seconds between legs, 2 to 3 minutes between sets for like 4 sets, building and load.
Why not a dumbbell step up?
Well, I want to specifically mimic the front squat position to try to actually develop single leg mechanics of your front squat versus like a step up. I don't know, you might get like halfway up with one leg and then step up with the other, and then you're alternating legs as well. So not that would be a bad thing to do, but
yeah, I would say too, mechanical advantage would be the principle. Like mechanical advantage is lower, right? Like why wouldn't we?
This is loading. I would also, that was the other thing I was going to say, is just like overall loading. You're going to be able to load a front rack, rear foot elevated split squat way more 100%. Than a step up.
That's what we were kind of talking. We touched on in the toolkit, but the purpose of this is a little bit of a deeper dive. Is like, okay, we said, hey, go. When I was in the toolkit, I was like, just go harder in your accessory work. Like have some intensity in it. People don't go hard enough. But part of that, like this is the beauty of the podcast, not the toolkit that's a little bit shorter, is going, well, sometimes we limit the amount of intensity that we can have because our exercise selection is limiting the intensity.
Yeah.
Or it's limiting mechanical advantage of the movement or the amount of load or tonnage that we can do. You can't do as much load on a front rack step up as you could a rear foot elevated front rack split squat,
and I think there's also a big issue in our space where we always do our accessory work after a Metcon, or we always do our accessory work like after 3 major lifts. So like we snatch, we squat, we deadlift, and then we're doing like some dumbbell rear foot elevated split squats with like 15-pound dumbbells. Yeah. And that's why I said, like, I've done with multiple people where like that is actually the main lift of our day.
Yeah. I think the question is, what's the intent? And if the intent is just, hey, we're trying to make sure that we bulletproof their knees, maybe they keep the intensity low and they do it after. Yeah. If the intent is we are trying to fix this part in the larger pattern, and because of that, we want to drive up their 1RMs, we're going to want to keep that first when we want to make sure that we're loading it. A good rule of thumb in strength training is to try to keep kind of your more dynamic, high nervous system work at the beginning of a training session. And if you're trying to do heavy RFE split squats after doing a Metcon, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we were even talking about it the other day. We were doing some programming, and someone asked us if they were like, "You're going to squat before you Olympic lift?"
Oh, it was Angelo. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we were like, yeah. And it was like, because it needs to be the main priority, because the Olympic lifting is actually...
Who was that for? I can't remember now.
I don't remember.
I don't either. Yeah.
The Olympic lifting is actually limited by the squat strength, not by the Olympic lifting. Yeah. Like the Olympic lifting technique of that athlete is actually really good. The issue is their front squat is so weak that if their front squat doesn't go up, their clean's never going to go up. Yeah, it has nothing to do with their Olympic lifting.
I would be a great example. My 1 rep max squat clean was 320. My 1 rep max front squat was 320. Right? It's sad.
Yeah,
I know.
So if we had an athlete like you, because this is a perfect example, if we always squat clean before, then your nervous system's a little bit dampened and you go into your front squats, while you probably will still make progress if you're on a decently structured program, it's going to be very slow. Yeah. But if we now reverse that order and say, hey, your priority is driving up your front squat or your just squat strength in general, and you don't even touch squat cleans, most likely your squat clean is actually going to get better.
Yeah, because if I can get under the bar, I just can't stand it up.
Yeah. I literally have an athlete that has a deadlifting weakness. And today, for his training, he started with absolute deadlift strength. Then we did some power clean work. And then we actually did some like power clean battery. And each one was more and more dampened purposefully. Yeah. I wanted to go in that order.
Well, let's flip it. You cool going through some of the major movement patterns? If we pass squatting and then we go to deadlifting and say, hey, somebody then their deadlift is lagging, their rear chain needs more development. Because deadlifting is like the one where you have to be a little bit more careful and particular about how you address it in training. Sure. Either of you guys, like how do you think differently about the deadlift when implementing into somebody's training as the priority versus a squat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I still always go back to what part in that pattern is limited. And sometimes it's hard to identify with the deadlift because there's kind of so many moving pieces but so many moving pieces in such a simple movement. Grab the barbell, pick it up, stand to extension, put it back down. But I still try to do that in the assessment process with an athlete of seeing, okay, what does their hinge look like? Like in our assessment, the first thing we do is just have someone do a toe touch. What does their actual hip hinge look like? Where are they compensating? Are they shifting from one side to the next, or are they rounding their back almost immediately because they don't have any flexion in their spine? And if all of that looks good, then I'll take it back to, okay, how do their hamstrings work? How do their glutes work? How are their lower erectors working? And then what's their setup on the deadlift? Because I think a lot of it is just technique or a mental block because people have hurt their back in the past on deadlifts.
Yeah. So, but check all those boxes, right? So like somebody's really confident in it. I don't know, maybe they're younger, right? Like they've never hurt their back. You got a 22-year-old. Their positions look good. The setup looks good. They're not doing a clean deadlift for their traditional deadlift or whatever. Like, are you thinking about it any differently than the squat? Well, I'll just say what I'm thinking, right? So I'm not trying to tee you up. Is like deadlifts are so much more neurologically taxing, right? Because it's so high motor unit recruitment that in my experience, like I'm just more careful. I'm not like, hey, we're gonna have 2 heavy deadlift days a week, right? Like squatting, we might have 2, maybe even 3 in some scenarios, or one of those is like a unilateral day.
Yeah.
How do you guys approach that logistically, planning for the deadlift? If you've got, hey, you have to have specificity. We're gonna deadlift 1 day a week. All that accessory work for the hamstring, for the low back, for the glutes. How are you kind of structuring that throughout the week for somebody?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of conjugate style work when it comes to pulling, because you can now change. One, you can actually change the plane if there's certain limitations within that pattern, but you can also just change the different mechanical advantage of the lift. So maybe one day it is actual deadlifts and we're going really heavy. The next day is speed base or chains or bands, where now you can lower the loading, but we're still working through whatever that sticking point may be in the deadlift. I really like that, because then you have these high and low days, or what they call max effort days and dynamic days, that allow you to kind of touch all the bases that may be weak points in their deadlift.
But not as much of a fan as something like a 5-3-1 Wendler progression when it comes to deadlifting.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the athlete, right? Like, honestly,
don't give me the it depends.
The neurological issues that you run into are typically with athletes that are already really strong.
Yep.
Right. So like if you have an athlete that wants to drive up their 1RM, but they're already deadlifting 550 pounds, then they're really tapping into their nervous system. If someone's weak, I think you can actually be pretty straightforward with their deadlift progressions. Once someone is pretty good and now you're just trying to drive it up because there's a 1RM deadlift coming at the games, and while they deadlift 550, there's going to be guys that deadlift 600. We got to get it closer, close that gap. Then you need to be a little bit more thoughtful about how intense you're going, and then changing up maybe the dynamics of the actual movement.
Yeah. With a movement like the deadlift as well, something I always try to think about, and this is like also conjugate, like using rep method stuff to just build like accessory muscle groups that help with the deadlift. So like isolating the hamstrings, isolating the lower back, isolating the glutes, and doing like some pretty serious volume. But separately from that, I do like to try to think about how can I build up a movement without doing the movement like 5 times a week that someone needs to work on. I've done like a deadlift cycle with someone where like we do 1 true day of deadlifting, we do 1 speed pulling day, and then we actually do like a big good morning day. And now they're not actually pulling from the floor, but they're still building and loading the mechanics of the hip hinge for the deadlift.
Why for the CrossFitter? What are you concerned about pulling heavy 3 days a week?
Well, the only reason I was saying that is because of how much we pull from the floor, like in doing workouts. So if I'm thinking more like semifinal games athletes who are training multiple times in a day, but they might have another workout later in the week with like 90 deadlifts in it, or something, pulling from the ground. Another day where they're doing clean and jerks from the ground, snatches from the ground, dumbbell snatches from the ground, dumbbell box step overs.
There's so much hinging in the sport.
And they're like, we're always hinging, always doing something with our shoulders. And like, so how can I find ways to manipulate the training to still create transfer to the actual movement that I want to do without always doing the movement? And that is something I do take into consideration as well for like workouts, is with how much rep volume we build in like intervals or anything we're doing like conditioning wise, in like mixed aerobic work. I take that into consideration in the total volume of the week to what I'm doing in strength training. And then also if I do have someone with like an absolute deadlift issue, I might try to like remove deadlifts from workouts for a little bit, so that they can actually push that up instead of like still having that in the week. And now I'm like kind of blending, like working on endurance and strength. And then I think that actually causes issues in actually getting strong, from what I've seen. with people, I actually try to like eliminate that sometimes, depending on where they're at in the season.
That's a really good point. I know it's not answering your question, Jake, but for those athletes that are trying to get stronger, if you're still putting those movements into Metcons, there's a lot of interference effect going on. So for example, if I'm trying to get my deadlift stronger, but then also twice a week I have, maybe on a Monday I'm doing 100 dumbbell power cleans in a workout because I'm doing the class workout. And then on a Wednesday, I'm doing a bunch of power snatches. Now I'm fatiguing that pattern. And then on Friday, I'm trying to do heavy deadlifts. You're not going to get the same effect out of it as you would if you were fresh going into it.
This is which is the reason why we'll tell people like, hey, to work with one of our coaches, our cap on class workouts per week is 2, right? Like we'll say, hey, look, you start doing 3-4 class workouts a week. It's not that we're like, we need to be in control of everything. It's just going, hey, if you want to achieve your goals and you have a weak squat or a weak deadlift, like we can't account for all the other volume that's occurring throughout the week. Like you said, you use that key term, it's going to create interference, right?
And on top of that, you can't do a qualifier every week because there's qualifiers like every week now.
Every single week.
But I have legitimate remote clients that try to do a qualifier every week. And if I tell them not to, they like typically still do it. And it's like, you literally can't do just you get broken. It adds up eventually.
Yeah. All these like, the strength programs that we will recommend, or like the power lifters that we listen to and everything, we forget often like they're playing in a sport. I mean, it's unlike what we're doing. CrossFit is the hardest sport to program for. And so that's sometimes who I get annoyed with people. We've all heard it. Like, you guys are overthinking this. It's like, it doesn't work if you don't think about all the contractions throughout the week. Like we've had athletes that we've probably tried at some point in our coaching career, we're like, yeah, have fun in your classes and we'll just give you some supplemental strength work, and they don't get stronger.
Yeah.
Right. It's like,
and then they get frustrated by it.
And then we get fired. So, and they don't get what they want, and they're not happy either. Everybody's unhappy. Yeah. So let's go to upper body a little bit. I don't know if you want to tee that up a little, Brandon, like how
he is the upper body.
Not with strength, just maybe some endurance work. I mean, okay, I'll pitch to you guys. Let's just say, because strict press is a big one for people. Like a lot of the guys I work with are like, oh, I can bench press. I'm pretty confident and comfortable because everyone kind of grew up doing that, especially if they played sports.
I'm that guy.
But then, then all of a sudden you get the barbell into the front rack and your strict press is like way lower than your bench press, which is going to be, but like I'm talking about like less than half of your bench press. That's a problem.
Yeah. So I'll tee it up here. Use the example again. So my all-time bench is 350. I think the most I ever did on a strict press, it's not awful, but I think it was like 185.
Weak.
Yeah.
That's very weak.
190 maybe at the most.
Dom's over here strict pressing 250.
Maybe add a little curveball here for you, Dom, just because like the strict press is weak, but I could split jerk 345.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? Yeah. Why does that make sense to you?
I also see a ton of, like, I have a male athlete that can strict press 235, but benches like 330. So like they're way closer than 350 and 185. Like I strict pressed 185, but my bench was only 315.
But why can I split jerk so much?
Right. And I think
speed under the bar. Yes. Right. Yeah. But yeah, go back.
Sure.
So where would you begin so you're looking at the strict press and the bench press and something like that, where it's like very limited for me. Again, kind of just like the squat and the deadlift, where's your brain go? Like, where's your mind go with how you're going to take that pattern, break it into parts? What parts are you looking at, and then how are you addressing it?
Yeah, I mean, when I have an athlete come to, let's use the bench press, strict press example, the first thing I actually think of is just how much more in general, like vertical pressing is in our sport when it comes to like handstand push-up, and how much more we see that compared to like a horizontal press outside of like the ring dip of a muscle up or the dip of a bar muscle up, which really isn't there anymore if you're a good puller. I'm going to need to work on your strict press, and I'll probably neglect your bench press.
Bro,
honestly.
No.
Because don't do that
because you're probably, if your bench press is that good, you're probably the person too that if you don't bench press for you, you'll probably still bench press like 315.
Yeah, it's like my dad
when it comes
who
around,
doesn't work out for 5 years and then lays down and hits his chest real hard a couple times and just benches 300 like cold turkey.
Right. Some people just
it's just stupid.
If you really did bench a ton because of football or whatever in your background, you have a training age in bench press, but you have no training age in strict press. So your strict press will probably just blow up with like basic strict press training.
And so I think what you're touching, so we're always trying to like extrapolate principles, and what you're touching on that NomShift does a great job in our mentorship program, like Program Design Foundations is, and you were talking about this with strength just yesterday, is training age. How important understanding someone's training age is, which is another principle that we can pull out of here. Cause you're going, wait a minute, how much benching have you done? How much strict pressing have you done? And Brandon touched on it with deadlifts. like, hey, if I have a newbie, I don't need a conjugate protocol, right? We can go simple linear progression. I mean, it doesn't have to be 5-3-1. We could go, hey, do 6 to 8 reps till you can't do 6 to 8 reps anymore, and then go 4 to 6 and 3 to 5 and 2 to 4. So it's like lower training ages, the simpler and more linear the protocol can be. And then the more advanced your training age is, the more, is it oversimplified to say the more complicated it should be? Or,
complex. You're going to add some complexity to it and some different variants maybe of those lifts. I think it's important too to distinguish. Someone may have a high training age with just training in general. Like they did a lot of sports, but they have a low training age in CrossFit.
Yes.
And that varies widely amongst the people that come in and work with us, or just like even go to a CrossFit gym. And so if someone comes in, like we just had a podcast, we were talking about bodybuilding, for example, and all they've done is bodybuilding, then their training age for CrossFit and doing all the endurance side of stuff, or even maybe some of the power lifts and Olympic lifts, they haven't done much of those. They did a lot of isolated work, and now we're asking them to deadlift, bench press, and clean and snatch. And so you're starting from kind of like day one with those athletes versus the athlete that does come in and maybe they've done CrossFit for 10 years.
A lot of Jake anecdotes today, but same thing with running with me, right? I told my coach early on, I was like, hey, listen, man, like I've been lifting weights since I was 12. So I've been doing it for 21 years. And now I'm running for the first time ever. I've never run more than 5 miles and I'm training for a marathon. Dude, we were doing like more complicated intervals and all this sort of stuff. At one point, I'm like, man, I think I could just go shuffle every day and I'm going to PR my marathon for 2 years. And we actually did. We've simplified everything. So yeah, just a story.
And I think actually it's a good principle you bring up, is like there is some level where we need to adopt more like monotony in CrossFit training. Like it doesn't have to be super nuanced every single week. Like you can do stuff for a long time and repeat it.
Yes.
Like you can repeat cycles of strength training for years.
I'm just going to give just a quick side note tangent. I think that nuance is the death of performance. And I know that people probably don't like that, but what I mean is when you are trying to constantly change things and you always want to add nuance, most of the time people that add nuance to anything are just trying to obfuscate because they don't know anything. Like they're muddying the waters because they don't really understand the topic, which I'm guilty of too. It's like if I don't understand it, I just kind of speak around it. But with training in particular, it is important that you stay focused on the principles, and the methods can change a little bit within maybe a training cycle, but like really stay focused on what you're working on as opposed to always trying to have constant variance. And I know that that's a bedrock of the sport of CrossFit is constant variance, but constant variance comes in testing and not necessarily in training.
Yeah. Like what do you do? How do you respond to an athlete who's like, I feel like I haven't handstand walked in like 3 weeks and I'm not a great handstand walker, but you're working on like straight arm stability, like 3 times a week.
Yeah.
How would you explain that to them?
So I always say this to athletes. I say, look, you have a floor and a ceiling, right? If we want to drive up the floor, which is your handstand walk's not very good right now, we need to actually raise the ceiling first. Because if you keep the ceiling the same, even if we start driving the floor up, you're living in this really short room. It's only like 3 feet tall. And then the floor hits the ceiling and you never get better. So yes, we can just do handstand walks and get you better to a point. But then you plateau, and if you don't fix the actual limitation, the straight arm strength, maybe it's getting your hips stacked over your shoulders. Some people, it's just like wrist issues, whatever it may be. If we don't fix that, then you're never going to be an elite handstand walker. So it's always better to start with the most basic fundamentals. Like again, this is going back to like access, control, mastery, and performance, our 4 pillars of performance for the sport of CrossFit. If you're not doing that, then you're not raising the athlete's ceiling. And at some point, they're going to hit their head on it, and they're going to be wondering why they're not getting any better.
Let's round it out and then finish up with a pull, because we talked about hinging and squatting and pressing. Pulling, there's so many ways that we could approach this. The one thing that always jumps in my head, because you talking about raising your ceiling, that made me think of it right away, is how many female athletes, I don't know if you guys have coached a lot of female athletes like this, that could do like 30 unbroken chest to bar and then like 5 strict pull-ups, right? Like, what do you do in that scenario?
A lot of absolute strength on pull-ups, like weighted pull-ups.
Yeah.
A lot, with females especially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that both males and females need it, but females probably even more by, especially if they're relatively weak, doing a lot of absolute strength work. The one thing I'll note is it's not just to improve your pull-ups, it's to keep you healthy so that you can do a lot of butterfly pull-ups when you need to in competition. I think that's the problem, is like, well, I can just keep doing butterflies and get better at them for a while, but if you start having these nagging injuries because your shoulder girdle can't support all those contractions of the butterfly pull-up or the ring muscle up or the bar muscle up, eventually you run into problems later on. And so I'm always trying to look 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, to make sure that they can continue to perform. And it's not just the next 2 months, all I care about is you doing butterfly pull-ups.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why we will all put in horizontal pulling for somebody in the off season, or even supinated pulling in the off season too as well, because we never change grip orientation in the sport ever.
And we need supinated pulling because it matters for rope climbs, pegboard, muscle up, depending on your level.
But. Yeah, for sure. So, cool. You want to tie it up?
Yeah, I think that as an athlete, if you're writing your own programming, then I would just go back to those fundamentals, the 4 pillars of performance, which we have a whole nother podcast on. You can look on the feed. That again is looking at your mobility first, your access. Do you have the range of motion? And then move into, do you have control in those range of motion? And then work on the mastery side, which again is like, now we can drive up our 1RMs or build endurance. And we have a whole muscular endurance podcast too. This is kind of like, we were just talking about this because we did the toolkit video. So we wanted to give you guys some quick thoughts on ways that you could start to build in mastery. And then once you have the movement, that's when you can do the fun stuff in the sport. But it's a fault of those that want to perform well in the sport just to jump into the sport and do it, because you're going to get better for a short period of time and then you're going to be stuck. If you actually are thinking about the next year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, and you want to keep doing this, fixing all of your movement patterns, becoming really controlled and stable in those patterns, having good movement economy will lead to better performance.
Perfect.
Cool. See you guys.